All right, everybody, welcome. Can I get kind of a confirmation that folks can hear me, whether you put that in chat or say it on here? Can everybody hear me pretty well?
I can hear you.
I can hear you.
All right, sweet. Sweet, got some confirmations. Can I also get a confirmation that on my screen you see a slide that says black belt bullet writing with blue letters and my group emblem in the top left? Everybody seeing that?
I can see it.
Copy. Yep.
All right, sweet. Okay, so we're gonna go ahead and get started. As a reminder, this will be about an hour long. I'll take about 15 minutes Q&A at the end. So we'll go ahead and get there. Some housekeeping things to address. If you hear some crying in the background, that's just my 10-month-old baby. So she's just saying hello and she wants to be part of the show too. But my wife is being an awesome team player and taking care of her while I teach. So we're gonna go ahead and get going. First thing I wanted to kind of say is thank you for everybody who made it and everybody who's joining, and for anybody that's not watching now the YouTube video. Appreciate you going out there and looking this up. So just a little bit of updating since last time. But as it shows, I'm Captain Mike Vetri. I'll kind of go ahead and get into this and go over what we'll be addressing today. So I'll go over my intro, some stats that will kind of bring you, kind of gain your attention a little bit on what we'll be talking about. Vanquishing the basic vocabulary, so kind of building our vocabulary, making our bullets more competitive. And then I call it spotting the good, fixing the bad, and researching the ugly. Kind of my silly version of the good, the bad, and the ugly. We'll go over a thing that I call trap doors. So these obscure aspects of the AFI that not too many people know about, at least when it comes to evals. And then finally, for officers out there, kind of some future trends of OPRS and the bullet writing that's associated with it and the format. Just to make sure that my slides are moving, does everybody see kind of a mind-blown head and the contents and everything in like blue letters at the top? Just doing one final.
Good copy.
All right, sweet. So we're going to go ahead and get started. So about me, so I started in Baltimore. That's where I was born and raised. I spent a whopping 2 years in the 80s. It was a great time. I got 3 brothers and a sister, and I went to Francis Scott Key High School in Maryland, home of the Eagles. That's where I began my love for hurdles and sports in general. Those are my events down there. You can kind of see any track and field runners out there. Oh, shout out, sweet. Especially you sprinters and jumpers. Then I tried to go to a certain college in Colorado. Didn't make it the first time. They said my SAT reading was too low, so I went to a prep school. And I got my SAT reading improved by a whopping 10 points just to make it. So I didn't get 10 points smarter. I think I got 10 points luckier. So yeah. And then I decided to go to prison for 4 years, or better known as the Air Force Academy. That's where I got my commission, class of 2011. Any Academy grads out there, our exemplar was Robin Olds. Pretty intense officer back then. If you're not familiar, definitely look him up. So after that was UCT in Keesler. Started my first squadron, the 412 Comm Squadron over at Edwards. That is where I happened. So I started Krav Maga, by the way, which is a martial arts system at the Academy. And I followed up throughout my time active duty and eventually became an instructor in at Edwards. In September of 14, I took a black belt test. It was 16 hours long. It was awful, but that's kind of the whole, now you can kind of see the link of why I call this black belt bullet writing, just my own personal touch in there. So after Edwards was New Mexico State as an Air Force ROTC instructor. I got to teach college kids for 3 years, and also, you know, it was a blast. To this day, it was my all-time favorite assignment. Nothing against everything else you see on here, but in my opinion, there's nothing like influencing the next generation of leadership in the Air Force. So if there's anything that, you know, if for any officers out there, if you ever want to make a change in the Air Force or anything like that, it starts from the beginning. So in my opinion, it does start at those commissioning sources. And those guys, to this day, I still keep in touch with. And any Det 505 out there, give me all a shout out. Miss you guys. I highlight this a little bit. Oh yeah, there's my animation for it. Still my all-time favorite assignment. From there, went from a heck of a jump. I went from COM to Air Force ROTC to the AFSRT, also known as the 33rd Network Warfare Squadron. My first real taste of DCO. And during that time, I got married to the love of my life, Silvana. And right now, after the 33rd, in about August of 2019, I transferred to the COG. And while I was there, the coolest thing that I could ever imagine happened on October 3rd. And that was my baby girl, Alessandra. And there she is. That's roughly about a 7-month picture. She's 10 months right now. But yeah, I got to update my phone background picture because that's also her too. But about a couple months ago, I transferred to the 616th OC and I'm having a blast over there right now. So on to the presentation, on to what I want to get to today. So before I get into the really cool, like academic nitty gritty stuff, I kind of wanted to give you some mind-blowing stats. So in April of 2020, a few months ago, I launched a survey across social media only for airmen, big A, so active duty, guard, and reserve, that had 10 questions on it. And I actually got about 1,200 people to respond. About 150-ish of what I would classify as senior or upper level leadership. So I got lieutenant colonels, colonels, seniors, and chiefs that responded as well. And I'll kind of classify them on how they responded in a little bit. But it was actually about 1,100 more than what I expected. So anybody who did this survey, a special shout out to you. Thank you for contributing to this data because it heavily influenced what everybody's about to see. So 1,200 airmen responded. And one of the questions I asked on this survey was, pick 2 aspects of a bullet that you think are most important. And I gave about 8 options. The vast majority of y'all picked scope. So I know those numbers don't add up. You're like, wait, 54, 34, and 32, that adds up to more than 100. You're right. How this was, how people selected was you got to pick 2. So 54%, it's really about, 27%, if that makes sense. And then 34 picked readability, 32 picked data with a purpose. Those are the most important aspects that you all said are most important in a bullet. Now, again, I know these numbers don't add up to 100, but the questions ask you to pick 2. So half of you at least picked scope, a third of you at least picked readability, and a little less at least picked data with a purpose, how the numbers play out. And that's going to play a factor into what I'm going to teach a little bit later. And then I asked, what are the 2 most common errors that you see in bullet writing? So I kind of color-coded these 2 questions as far as responses. So a lot of you really value scope, and a lot of you think that stretching the impact is a significant error you see a lot in bullet writing. But at least half of you picked fluff language, and I totally agree. There aren't really any set fast and hard rules on the kind of fluffy language you can use in bullet writing. The AFI 362406, that's our eval AFI, doesn't say, you can't say phenomenal, stellar, majestic, CGO. It's just ill-advised, obviously. And then if you notice the black letters, a lot of you value readability in a bullet, and you're also most frustrated with lack of readability. So a little bit of a pattern I saw there. One more question, and this is it was gee whiz. Right now I'm talking to one of the action officers that's really working with perhaps or potentially revising the OPR in the future. So I kind of took a little bit of stats from that, and I asked all the 1,200 airmen, do you think the current stratification system allows an accurate means of truly separating the best senior NCOs and officers from the rest? 2/3 of you do not think that it does that. About a fifth of you think, sure, it does. And about a seventh-ish say, well, I'm not really familiar with it. So generally, the folks that aren't familiar with the stratification system are the ones that don't have to worry about it. So technical sergeant and below. And that's really it, because officers sometimes they deal with strats, even the second lieutenants. So, okay, moving on. So that was all airmen. Now I want to show you something interesting. I asked you all to kind of read a bullet, and some of y'all might remember this bullet. Essentially, what I did was I crafted 4 different bullets that spoke on the exact same event. And the event was essentially this member of the Air Force who just crushed an inspection, and what he did to do so well, which was essentially writing new policies and procedures, how many discrepancies he erased, and and then the impact. It was all saying the same thing, just different wording. So when I involved a numerical percentage, which I believe said erased 90% discrepancies, I also put in comparative data, which said how fast you did it. So not that you just did that, but gave it some context. So compared it to either a time or a previous score or something. A lot of you favored that one too, like, oh, comparative data. And the ones that had strong language in it, like dominated or revived or something like that, really potent language, you favored that one as well. And then high impact. So that's speaking to one of the bullets that talked about that it was a MAGCOM level inspection. So what I noticed, and you look down here, is that the top 2 bullets that were the most favored had numerical percentage and comparative data. So if you look at the 3rd most popular bullet, everybody thinks, oh, impact, impact, impact. But when things were explained as a percentage, or how fast things were done, or the data was given context, it seems like you all favored that one more than just a high impact. And then of course the worst written one was, yeah, I gave you a percentage, but the language was basic and it was medium level impact. So a conclusion I noticed is that high level stats or percentages and comparative data carried more weight when you all were selecting your most preferred bullet than the level of impact. So something I noticed there. Now we're going to move on to what the senior leadership thought of all this. So when I say senior leadership, I'm referring to 05s, 06s, E8s, and E9s. Only that population. So I set my filter to only those that responded. So again, senior leaders, what did you say? Pick 2 aspects of a bullet that are most important. 60% of you said the scope, 44 said readability, and 37 said data with a purpose. So pretty consistent with the previous answers. And then I asked you, what are the most 2 common errors that you see in bullet writing? Half of you went for fluff language. So that was interesting. 30%, or excuse me, about another half, at least half of you picked readability. But this one was writing impacts that are not truly impacts. Now, if you remember, the last population, which was all of you, you said stretching the impact. This one was deliberately phrased different. Writing impacts that are not truly impacts. There's a lot of, so for example, what I mean by this is that many people will think that coined or lauded by the commander is not really an impact. Did it happen? Yeah, but is that truly an impact from what you did? Like, you got a really good pat on the back. So stuff like that. Or if it just ends in, stellar, whatever, stellar airman. It's not an impact, it's more of a descriptor. So it looks like senior leadership has more, I guess, disdain towards impacts that, like I said, just aren't really there. The next question was, do you believe the current strat system truly separates the best senior NCOs and officers from the rest? Senior leadership, a little over a third of them think that it does. 3/5, about 60% still don't, and 5% somehow are unfamiliar with the strat system. So that was, I'd like to know where that 5% came from. And then I filtered it down to our mid-level, I call it like our mid-level management in the Air Force. So master sergeants, captains, majors, at least on both sides of the house, enlisted and officer. Only 20% of you thinks that it truly does. A whopping 72% of you, almost 3/4, you do not believe the current strat system really separates the best senior NCOs and officers from the rest. 8% of you are unfamiliar. So that might be kind of the newer captains that, just got out of tech school or whatever it may be, or it could be direct commissioning. So there's that possibility. By the way, I see a lot of you chatting. I'll get to kind of like what the chats are in a second. I just can't see it from my point of view yet. And then just as a reminder, there's what force thought. So total force and mid-level management kind of both agree in terms of, yeah, it does kind of capture it, you know, pretty well, but y'all are in agreement, definitely on the no part as well. It's only deviated by 6%. So that's an interesting statistic that I'm kind of passing up to people that are working this OPR revamping. What's really going to matter in evaluation. So I'm not saying that they'll be changing tomorrow or anything like that, but there is work, you know, up there on really making it fair and, you know, equitable evaluations at the end. So going on with the senior leadership responses, when they were asked to read a bullet, very similar thing. Numerical percentage, comparative data really came out strong. And then high impacts, okay, they're down there at 2 and 3. So what I got with them is kind of similar results, but highlighted and underlined in black, what I haven't kind of mentioned yet is that the #1 bullet that senior leadership picked mentioned vocabulary such as reviving, and this is the first time in 3 years that we got a highly effective, indicating that senior leadership really involves bullets that kind of speak towards improving the unit. And that is a major concept in the Air Force doctrine document. I believe is what AFDD stands for. I could be wrong, but it's the AFDD 1-2. I call it the LIME acronym. So leading people, improving the unit, managing resources, and executing the mission. So if your bullets kind of speak towards any of those, especially improving the unit, as it showed in this study, that's probably going to bode well for you for upper levels of leadership that are seeing this. There's something to keep in mind later. So there's the stats I started off with. Now we're going to get into, you know, what I actually plan on teaching. So we're going to start with vocab. There's a reason there's a tornado in the background. Any ROTC cadets out there that were, you know, under me when I was at your debt, you know, when I make academic material, I try to make it fun. I don't like to use the white background and the blue letters and making a snooze fest. So I make things a lot of fun in my presentations. So you'll see why there's a tornado in the background. Big words will get you attention, right? This is no news. This is nothing new to any of us. You are essentially competing for something. Officers, you're competing for schooling, command, or promotion. That is what an OPR is essentially, you know, used for. Our end of year eval or whatever eval we're getting. So every little tactic matters. You just saw strong language. Those kind of concepts were in the higher ranked bullets in that study than the basic vocabulary. An example, instead of increased, we all use the word increased. What are some stronger words out there? We have amplified, optimized, you know, surged, you name it. You'll see some examples in a slide coming up here, right? Why else does vocabulary matter? You'll leave the Air Force one day. We're not going to be in the Air Force forever. It may seem that way, but it's not a fact. I've been in for 9 years. 9 years, 2 months, and 18 days. Who's counting? Not me, but it has gone by pretty quick. So what I'm saying is it's never too early to practice for the outside world. When you're assembling that resume and you're looking for that job opportunity, you know, these little tactics matter, especially vocabulary. So something I came up with way back in 2012 or 2013, excuse me, when I was at Edwards, was this thing called the whirl. It all started we had these murder boards. And for anybody listening that's not familiar with Air Force, it's not as gruesome as it sounds. It's just essentially when people look over these award packages and they tear it apart, try to wordsmith and everything like that. I'm not sure where the word murder came from, but it really does not involve any violence, disclaimer. So it's called the whirl. The word helping index reference by length. I can see some chat up there already. So what this thing does is I came up with it at Edwards and kind of expanded upon it throughout this year. It's essentially a giant synonym list. So when we're playing with, you know, space and all and trying to make sure that we're fitting these bullets into a certain line, that, you know, we can reference something just shorter or just longer instead of having to study thesaurus.com and have that up. So it's sitting right there in front of you. It's not an all-inclusive document. It's living, so if you can come up with words on your own that are starting to trend, feel free to add it. I don't have it copyrighted. So here's an example of the world. By the way, that's why there's a tornado on the last slide. World, pun, get it? Yeah. Dad jokes. I've been a dad for 19 months, so I can say that now. So here's a screenshot of it, a little bit of a screenshot. I know it's kind of hard to see, but what you can see is that the words get longer as you move down the list. So when you're wordsmithing, it's sitting right there. Perfect example, you look at, let's see, we'll just start at reduce, the first column. You go 5 words down, or like, okay, or we'll go 4 words down. Yeah, you killed it, you struck it, whatever. Oh, that's not big enough. We'll skip down to maybe crushed or stormed or depleted it, slammed, thrashed, whatever you want to call it. There's big, pretty words that get us attention on those 1206s and evals. All right, you'll see why I got Usain Bolt on here. So here are some examples of some synonyms. I'm just going to go ahead and fill a slide up, and some of my personal favorites are highlighted in yellow. So instead of reduce, you got torched. We got search for increase. Look at these, intensified. I know that's kind of like popular in the meme community now. What else we got? Led. Everybody loves says directed, or what about helmed or architected, orchestrated. Secure for you security forces guys out there, or even comm squad, cyber, when you secure a network, secure a base, whatever. Fortify it, barricade, wrangle, whatever you want to call it. Vulnerability, that's a very popular one in my field. So I'm 17 Sierra, I'm cyber. And we always talk about vulnerabilities and fix 15,000 of them, whatever. So what are some synonyms of those? Gaps, flaws, fissures. And then everybody's favorite, praised or lauded. I deliberately left off lauded because there are other words for it. Vaunted, acclaimed, aggrandized. Upper right-hand corner, by the way, there's also wordhippo.com. Shout out to Tech Sergeant Glass, who's also very active on the Air Force writing and self-improvement page. She kind of gave me that idea of wordhippo.com. I did not know that even existed until early 2020. So thank you for that. All right. So there are some world examples right there. So we're going to go on and move on to spotting the quote-unquote good in a bullet. So I put the word good in quotes because we made a lot of people think, these bullets may be good, but they could use improvement. They're not. There's a lot of room to grow. And here's what I mean. Bullet writing black belts are not just good. They should be experts at their craft. And if you just write things that are good, that could be detrimental to the bullet. We all know that our average bullets, if we can't really make it any better, we're just going to throw it in the middle. If Chief Hood is out there, or if you're watching this YouTube video, he actually posted a very great analogy. I think it was on our bullet writing Facebook page. And he kind of said it like a boxer analogy where, no, forget it. You don't want just bullets 1 and 6 on a 1206 or an OPR or whatever to be fantastic, or the first and last ones. You want every single one to be a knockout punch. Like it's just, every single one is impressive to that board. It's like, wow, like no matter how you put this, any of these could have gone anywhere. That's the ultimate goal. So examples of some good bullets, which opinion, based on trends I've seen, maybe are not so good. These are all nicknames that I've given them. So we got the TCP dump bullet. Any cyber guys out there, or comm, or anybody who's ever looked at some cyber stuff, a TCP dump command, without getting too technical, is essentially what you saw in the background of this slide. It gives you a verbose amount of information, and a lot of it you might not need. So I'll show you some examples of that bullet in an upcoming slide. Zorro's rival. So if anyone has ever watched the show Zorro, how it usually, begins is Zorro will pop up and he'll carve a Z in your television screen, and looks all cool, fancy, and looks amazing, right? He cuts your screen. So Zorro's rival is also really good at cutting and shortening things and abbreviating, acronym, cutting things down to size. He's his rival. So there's an overload of symbols going on, commas, slashes, abbreviations, acronyms, everything is cut down and you can barely read it. And that's just your attempt to tell a long story in just 140 characters, or whatever the length of the line is. We also have what I'd call the library, where you slap titles everywhere. Everybody knows, or if you don't know, you should kind of avoid throwing in names or titles that not everybody is familiar with. For example, in the cyber community, we have an exercise that is called Black Demon. It is essentially our DCO guys go in and they practice defending a network. It is very well known in the DCO community, probably OCO, but outside of cyber, it's probably a myth, or it sounds like, you know, a boss in a video game. Red flag, we know. Silver flag, a lot of us might know. Black Demon, that's only cyber, you know, that's cyber specific. This next one I call The Clash. That was a band back in the 70s or 80s or one of those decades. I don't remember. I only spent 2 years in the 80s. And they sung a song that most people will kind of recognize if they hear it. It's I Fought the Law and the Law Won. You know, in bullet writing, that's when you say I did this and it happened. An example I saw when I was reviewing an OPR was fought for 120 NPA reserve days and earned it. And it's like, well, did you really have to say that you fought for it or you tried for it? Because in the end, you earned it. So was that previous part, the process of doing it, really necessary because you got it? If that makes sense. I also have what's called the mainstream media bullet. So putting in stats that don't really matter. You're just putting in numbers because someone somewhere along the line has told you you need numbers in your bullet. I would caution that and say you should have data in your bullet, and there are ways of capturing data without typing out a number in numerical form or Arabic form, whatever you want to call it. So you don't need to have that number 0, the number 1. There are other ways of capturing important data, such as using words like only, or first ever, or new, or highest in the decade, stuff like that. That's still very important data that is captured in words instead of numbers. So stats that don't matter. My two most, this personal opinion, my two most cautious or the two numbers that you should probably avoid when bullet writing are 0 and 100. And the reason why is because those two numbers usually mean something about a standard. So everybody right now is probably writing COVID-19 bullets. We are in August of 2020. COVID-19 is not extinct yet, unfortunately. Everybody's probably saying they're saving their unit from COVID-19. I actually made a meme where it's Buzz Lightyear with his arm around Woody. He's looking out. He's like, COVID-19, COVID-19 bullets everywhere. So I just came from exec in July, and everybody was writing COVID-19 bullets on their award packages. And so they kind of lost value. So going back to the 0 and 100, meeting a standard, right? So when these COVID-19 bullets, 0 mission degradation, or 100% compliance, or 0 discrepancies, I highly caution writing those because you're telling the awards board or the promotion board or whoever that you met a standard. Especially you officers, you only get 10 lines, really 8, because 2 of them are push lines at the end. You only get 8 lines to capture all the cool things you've done in a year. If you're gonna spend one on saying how you met a standard, you might want to think about what other things you've done that year. Or for next year, what else can you do to get a bullet in? So that's something to keep in mind when you're thinking if you want to put in those kind of numbers. However, if you're saying that you went from 20 discrepancies to 0, that's pretty cool because it shows improving the unit, improving over time, or, you know, flawless whatever. Especially, you know, when I was chief of training for the 33rd, our rating went from something that could be better to effective. And hey, I'll say it. And I was like, you know what? We worked hard for that in only 3 months. I want to capture that. That's you know, in my opinion, that's okay. But if you were already effective and you're bragging about how you're effective, you know, rethink that. But moving on. Then you have the cheerleader bullet, which is unnecessary jubilant phrases. I'm not going to go too far in depth into that because we can all think of an example. And then the history professor, where you're describing something from start to finish, kind of similar to the clash bullet. Or not, yeah, but you'll see some differentiating examples here. Does anybody recognize that picture? If not, this is actually the library of the academy. So you'll see why I have that in there. So example of a TCP dump bullet, right? Launched a big data project, tracked 85 terabytes IP traffic, configured 29 servers, built 38 routers with network address translating. Okay, all that is extremely technical jargon. So it's a perfect example of TCP dump, way more info than what you need. But from a technical perspective, RTRs up here, that second line that you're all seeing, routers almost always have network address translation. So unnecessary. 85 terabytes IP traffic. Okay, why does it matter if it's IP or anything? We can probably guess that a lot of it's going to be that type. So, just kind of being redundant, it can be taken as you're just trying to fill space. Something to consider. Okay, yeah, I kind of already highlighted that. Zorro's rival. All right, so an example of the Zorro's rival bullet, look at everything that's cut down here. So plain English, you manage base security forces operations, deployed 81 canines. These numbers are all fabricated. Forces out there, and these numbers are totally asinine. I'm completely sorry. This is all 100% made up. You made 78 arrests, authored 56 tickets, and 2 high-value targets were apprehended, protected the second largest Air Force base. Look at everything that's cut here. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 9. And those are just, abbreviations, apostrophes, and slashes. I didn't do the acronyms, which was, SF and, ops probably should be actually circled as well. So it's just a ridiculous amount of consolidation there. Library bullet. Led Operation Quantum, supported 3 matchcoms in support of a high-value target, detected 87 terabytes critical, blah, blah, blah. Okay, does anybody know what Operation Quantum is? The 33rd does. Does anybody know what Black Demon is? The DCO guys do, but the perfect example of the library where you're just slapping titles on there because you think it has a lot of impact, but once it gets out of the cyber field and up, it's maybe your group level or wing or even Air Force wide, if it's impressive enough, no one's going to know what those are. The Clash, here we go, perfect example. Bolstered squadron personnel strength, fought for 120 MPA days and won. So the rest is kind of irrelevant to this bullets, this bad bullets title, The Clash. But there's an example. You fought for it and you won it, or you earned it. Just say you earned it, or it was allocated. Mainstream media. Provided relentless network operations, maintain 100% uptime, 0 mission degradation, and the flight earned effective in cyber inspection. Okay, those are all meaningless data to put on there. I don't know why a little red line just popped up. Sorry about that. But yeah, so those are all, unless there's context or it shows improvement, it's probably not too impressive to address. Okay. So moving on with more examples here. The cheerleader bullet, phenomenal personnelist, relentlessly fix 130 admin errors. Sorry about that. And flawlessly, way too many adverbs and you're just filling the bullet with fluff, essentially. Then the history professor. Acquired an all-new training platform. You assessed 6 options, liaised with the contractor squadron, committed 100,000 to it. And you upgraded 300 members, knowledge, skills, and abilities. So you're pretty much, this bullet is essentially describing the Form 9 process, if anybody's not familiar, where you have to come up with at least 3 options and present it to the contracting squadron, and then they'll, the technically feasible yet cheapest option will win out. That's your storytelling of how you got through a Form 9 process. All right, and then fixing the bad. So when we're looking at these bad bullets, I kind of, skip this metaphor of have a startup routine when an eval or a 1206 is first presented to you. So, one thing that I do is I don't delve deep into the context first. I look at the bird's eye view and then the tree level, where you can call it forest eye or tree. Either way, you look at it whole concept, and then you'll dig down to the, the content later. So when you first look at it, I perform the 5 S's. First thing I'll do is, are there any spelling inconsistencies? So that, for example, a lot of wings will say, if you're going to give us, a 1206 or an eval, the spelling better be the same throughout, or at least abbreviations. So TM versus team, MBR versus member, check that out and see if that needs to be addressed before anything else. And then adhere to your wing level guidance, or group, or numbered Air Force, whatever the highest level guidance is coming down. And then the similar metrics. So if you see a lot of numbers that are exactly the same, that's at least a yellow flag, not a red flag. They may be talking about the same thing, but just rewording it. So 75 million mentioned a lot in the impact, or at least in the result. That may key you in on, all right, that's something I'm going to have to address later. I'm going to look at these 2 bullets a little bit closer after I go through, because they may be talking about the same event. There's been a lot of times where I've seen metrics that are very similar, and I'll look, and sure enough, it's like, oh yeah, committed, like it says up here, secured the $75 million network, and then below it's like, protected or defended $75 million network in this project. Okay, well, you got redundant there. The next S, statements of overexcitement. So fluff statements, exclamation marks, long lead-off phrases. So we're writing bullets, and that first semicolon is, roughly more than a third of the way down the bullet. They're probably saying too much, or I wouldn't give it more than a half of it. So that's something to look at for. Where's that semicolon hanging out at, that first one? Of course, the excessive white space, we're all familiar with that. There is no cut and dry guidance. I've heard a lot of, if there are more than 3 lowercase x's, then it's probably too much white space at the end. And then I call this the right side sweep. So everything that's going down the right side of the sheet, look for similar metrics, look for similar verbiage, look for impacts that kind of sound like they're the same. Or if they sound, look for also bullets that in general kind of have the same level impact, and then suddenly something's explosive. Or everything's the same impact, or one looks really deflated. We'll get into what those are here in a second. Or similar impacts, yeah, already said that. And then tree level. So once you finally start digging into the content, I call these particular bullets the job description bullets. It's like, wait, don't you do that all the time anyway? So something that's not particularly too out of the ordinary. It describes what your job is. So if you're the chief of training, it's like, okay, well, I reviewed this curricula, I approved it for these many operators. It's like, well, aren't you supposed to be doing that? So yeah, you want to write bullets about your job, but if it doesn't sound like, there's anything out of the ordinary, see if there are other impacts, or where else has that impact reached. And then there's the wait, what bullet, as I call it, where you're reading it and your first reaction is like, wait, what? So it's too technical, too abbreviated. So kind of similar to a TCP dump, but a wait, what kind of bullet is more focused on, it's too abbreviated, I can't read it, or it's way too technical. So it's not giving me too much info, I just can't read it. So that's kind of like a differentiator. And now I have what's called the RDX bullet, one of my favorites to kind of make fun of. If you've ever written one, I'm sorry, I'm going to make fun of it. So RDX, I studied chemistry at the academy, by the way, that was a blast. No pun intended, RDX, haha. So RDX is a chemical compound, and in general, apparently a handful of it, if you detonate it, can just take out everybody in a room. It's extremely unstable once it's introduced to fire, if you will. So, or high levels of heat, more so than TNT. So I call it the RDX bullet because you're reading everything. It's like, all right. And then suddenly the impact, it's like to just, save the world from extinction. We can all think of one. We've all probably seen one. one that I saw at Edwards when I was looking over a murder packages. I will never forget this bullet. Is that there was a technician that went out and he fixed like 3 computers in, you know, however many hours. I don't know, it was like 4 hours or something. Like, okay, you fix these computers and, you know, the Global Hawk Squadron. And then the impact was that he saved the entire $975 billion ISR mission. I mean, our whole ISR mission in the Air Force probably could have collapsed if it wasn't for fixing those 3 computers. And I looked at that and I'm like, you gotta be kidding me. No, not believing that, but I don't doubt you still did good work. And then we have the inverse of the RDX bullet, which is called the Atlanta Falcons bullet. So if anybody's out there, an Atlanta Falcons fan, I am extremely sorry. I'm going to make fun of this team. I personally am a Baltimore Ravens fan. I know we just killed it this last season and lost to the Titans. I don't need to hear about it. I'll probably hear about it though. But anyway, back in 2017, the Atlanta Falcons were in the Super Bowl. They were winning 28-3, and then they lost in overtime with only, I mean, they were winning with about 22 minutes of regulation left. And something happened. I don't know what. It was not Tom Brady. I'm a hardcore anti-Patriots fan. I think the Atlanta Falcons collapsed more than the Patriots did anything. I'm going to stick to that explanation. So an Atlanta Falcons bullet is when you start off extremely strong and it ends flat. It just gets deflated like a New England Patriots football. So an example of that is if, you know, you're talking about that you are addressing the DOD like number 5 or number 3 priority, and you connected, you know, this circuit that extends throughout the entire country, blah, 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 and then the impact, oh, secured our base. It's like, wait a minute. You know, your impact should probably be at least be greater than or equal to your action and result. You know, don't talk about all this great DOD level stuff and a circuit spanning the country and then just bring it back down to base level. You know, simple math, keep it greater than or equal to the action and result. And the last type of bullet, when you get down to the tree level, force numbers. So kind of similar to the mainstream media bullet, you're putting in numbers just because you can't think of any. And I'll show some examples here. So here's what we're going to do. I'm going to show some examples of everything I just kind of explained. I'm going to fill the bullet. Normally with more time, I'll just pop them on there and people will kind of contribute and think, kind of tell me what they think the bullet is. But I'm just going to fill the slide. So we're going to pretend all of these are one awards package. And then we're going to kind of diagnose what these bullets are. So you headed CCRI prep efforts, authored 2 policies, sealed up 5,000 vulnerabilities, reported 3 findings. And you got the #1 CCRI score in the Air Force to date. Those are force numbers. If your impact is you got the best, by the way, CCRI is Command Cyber Readiness Inspection. Any 3 Deltas, 1 Bravos, or 17s out there, you know what this is. You know this is anxiety inducing. So it's the cyber version of a UEI. It causes a lot of stress for anybody in those AFSCs. The reason it's force numbers is because look at this impact. #1 CCRI score in the Air Force to date. Awesome. But how'd you get to that point? You authored 2 policies, you sealed up 5,000 vulnerabilities. Is that a lot? Is that a little? I don't know. And you reported 3 findings. So you just have to write 2 policies. You have to report 3 findings. And if you just seal up 5,000 vulnerabilities, which in the cyber world doesn't take too long, I can promise you that, you get the #1 score in the Air Force. So again, force numbers. I kind of already gave it away, but install 2 law enforcement servers at the base visitor control center and enable communications between 200 security forces and Lancaster Police Department. These are old Edwards bullets, by the way. And you guarded $140 billion base RDX. Okay, so installing 2 law enforcement servers and enabling communication with off-base police and SF, you're suddenly guarding all $140 billion of what's inside that base just by installing 2 servers. I don't believe that. And I don't know if anybody else out there does. We can talk about that offline, but I doubt it. All right, and then just the inverse. All right, here it is, the Boeing KC-46 circuit. The DOD #3 priorities complete. You launched new air mobility command mission. All right, cool. Additional security of the base. Like, that fell flat. All right, what's this next one? You led a 10-member team for a network hardening effort. You implemented a classified data policy for a $275,000 network. Top inspection rating all time. So that's what I'm talking about, that right side sweep, like, #1 CCRI score in the Air Force to date. And down here, the fourth bullet, top inspection rating all time. Those sound very similar. So, okay. Next one. Wait, what? You helmed a SANS restoration. You stopped the DDoS attack within 2 hours, recovered 95 terabytes of .pst data, upgraded RTR ACLs, router access control lists for 1,000 DVCS devices. Anyone's not in cyber, you probably had trouble understanding any of that. So that's a wait, what bullet? And then finally, dominated access control project, 4 squadrons, 2 groups, wing staff upgraded against a bunch of attacks, $140 billion assets secured. That sounds very similar to number 2, access control project, 2 law enforcement servers at a visitor control center. Sounds pretty similar. Moving on. So I'm a little bit behind, so I'm just going to kind of fast forward through this slide. Here's my kind of bread and butter that a lot of people have implemented into their units. I've gotten 3 reservists that have told me it's become their, this has kind of become like their standard of writing with this C6 model. Long story short, when you research the ugly, you want to give data levels that kind of are not just raw numbers, if that makes sense. So a lot of times you'll see numbers that are not computed in any way, they're just raw. $14.2 billion Air Force network. We see that a lot in the DCO community. However many $1 billion worth of assets. So it's just a price tag. It's just a piece of data. It's not an average. It's not, you know, does that speak to a lot or a little? Or does it have relevance or context? Nope. It's just, here's how much it's worth, or here's how much we did. Boom. And we don't know if, you know, that's above the norm, below the norm, is that on par? Don't know, but someone told us we got to throw numbers in there, so numbers are in there. Okay. So I came up with a model to kind of solve that problem. So you want to dig deep, provide meaningful stats. So avoid those insipid level 1 stats. You want to show meaning and context, averages, comparisons, causal mechanisms, or maybe even forecasting, kind of proving that, look, the way these trends are going, we are set to have the highest rated score ever. I know we like to speak in past tense as opposed to future tense. I'm going to address that in the next slide. So here is my beautiful handmade C6 model. So we got 6 levels in this model. The higher the level, the more impressive the statistic is. It shows, you know, the more context. And I'm just going to go through it real fast. We have level 1, which is characteristic, right? So you look at this bottom bullet, there are your examples. Everything's a price tag. Everything's just, you know, a number with no meaning assigned to it. So a 4-member team. Is 4-member a lot, a little? I don't know. Cool. 4 members. Could you have led 5? Did you need 4? Don't know. A 7-hour mission. 7 hours. That seems long. SDOs in the 616th OC, they said 12 hours. You B2 pilots, U2 pilots, I think you guys can go for 20-ish. So I don't know, it doesn't seem too long, you know, so there's the context thing I'm talking about. Number 1 CGO, out of what, you know? Obviously that's an illegal strap, but just give them more examples. 1 hour reporting time. Is that a lot or a little? Why does it take an hour? Why can't you just make a call and get it done in 10 seconds? I don't know. Now we have comparative. Giving it some context. Oh, okay, the reporting time dropped from 3 hours to 1. That's an improvement. Okay, number 2 out of 30 NCO. Okay, comparative. So this type of data is, you know, it's comparing from the current condition from a previous condition, right? Or comparing a numerator to a denominator, a particular ranking as compared to the total available, right? Vulnerabilities are down 5,000, so maybe, you know, from 7,000 to 2,000. Or you are the only Arabic linguist in the squadron, so 1 out of however many are in your squadron, you're the only one that can speak Arabic. It's pretty cool. Then you got level 3, which is compiled. So these computations have taken place to yield new data. So these usually speak to averages, or, maybe some standard deviation, stuff like that. You're starting to crunch some numbers here. So if you're a squadron PTL, hey, your test average is 95%. You know, that's pretty cool. If you're that or UFPM, operator readiness is at 98%. That I like that. It's the Air Force standard. 90% sounds pretty sweet. Or your reporting time dropped 66%. So instead of saying dropping from 3 hours to 1, drop 66%. And then we got level 4, which is called combined statistics. So you're kind of taking two, if you can follow me here, 2 level 3 stats and comparing them. Or you're taking any one of those levels below and you're giving a comparison, or you're giving a context. You're comparing the current condition from a previous one. So instead of reporting time drop 66%, all right, well, how long did it take? Did it take all year? Did it take, oh no, it took 2 months. All right, wow, very nice job. Server availability is up 54% in only 2 months. All right, that's pretty significant. That also tells me the server availability, was at least at 46%. So you brought it from 46 to 100 or 45 to 99. Either way, it was garbage availability, and now it's miles ahead compared to what it used to be. That was a true story. Anybody who's ever worked with PEX, that server used to be atrocious. All right, calling the future, or also known as forecasting. This is where you start using maybe your Excel magic or graphs to kind of forecast where things are going to be in the future. I highly caution you using this, because if you're going to use it, you got to show why it's important. So you don't just want to say, we're projected to drop our reporting time 75% in 2 months. Okay, why is that significant? Oh, it's going to be the fastest in unit history. Wow, nice job, lieutenant or master sergeant, whoever did that. That means something. I'm excited now. So there's an example of calling the future. And then finally, we got our causal bullet. So causal is pretty much you have developed a mechanistic or surefire way to guarantee that something's going to happen. It's always going to be this way. So in plain English, what this example is you develop this new firewall configuration to deny 85% enemy attacks versus 62. That's an all-time high in security. So what you just did, it's always going to be better. This is how far you've come. It's never going to regress. And that means a lot. All right, some levels summarized. I'm a little short on time, so if you want, when you're watching this on YouTube, you can pause it here and kind of recap, but I'm gonna move on. So I came up with this little score sheet here. So back in my study, I kind of noticed that 15% of respondents kind of indicated that scope over data is kind of important. So the formula here, when you're doing this, is take your scope, which is seen as how many levels above you did you influence. So if you're a flight chief and you're writing something about the flight level that you did, you're at 0. If it's squadron level, you're at 1. Group level, that's 2 levels above. Wing is 3. MAGCOM's 4. Air Force level 5. Take your pick. Or if you're section, it'll all drop by 1. So you get the pattern, right? And then what data level are you reporting at? So in general, you kind of want to stay, you want to shoot for green, maybe even blue. Blue is kind of like, you see the key up here in the upper left is like your ace cards. Those are the ones you throw at the top and bottom of your evals and 1206s. Green, you want to veer towards, maybe the 2nd and 5th-ish. And then yellow, hopefully you don't have any red, that's in the middle. I really hope you don't have any black. That is, you're a flight chief and you're talking about something you did at a section level and it's just raw numbers. It's like, oh man, come on. Like, it's got to have farther reaching impacts than that. So that's something I came up with. You can pause it here if you're watching on YouTube and kind of decipher it. But in general, you kind of want to shoot for a compiled statistic, so percentages or computations at least 2 levels above. I'm sure you can think of something. If you're in a section, there's got to be something you can say at least at the squadron level. All right, here are just some examples. Again, short on time. This presentation is normally given, for a 2-hour time block. But here's your here's some 4 bullets to kind of give you an example of what I mean by that. I'll just go over one here. I'll talk on the 3rd bullet. So we got a flight commander tests and implements a new processing tool to cut investigation time by 78%. So there's a level 3 stat, right? You know, the computed stat across the wing. So we got a level 3 stat, and he's at the flight level, so that's 3 levels above him. So you run the math, 1.15 times 3, and you add a 3. We're at 745. So if you go back to the score sheet, you'll see that's a green bullet. And then we got another one here, who a flight commander, he stands up a new IQT program that will preserve 35% of the wing budget. So wing is 3 levels above him each year after implementation, making this the largest recorded savings. Okay, cool. So each year, that speaks to something permanent. That's a causal mechanism that he came up with. So that's level 6. So 1.15 times 3, you add 6, that's a blue bullet. That's probably something, you know, an event you want to throw out as your ace card, you know, the first or that last bullet. Trapdoors. Trapdoors are kind of like those obscure, hidden rules in the AFI that aren't well known. By the way, I'm probably going to run over. It's looking like 10 minutes if everybody's okay with that. So I'm just going to press. So here we go with trapdoors. Like I said, they're obscure. They're not too well known, but if we get caught off guard, it's kind of embarrassing. They're just these weird things that not too many people in the Air Force know about. So what I did is I looked over, because I hadn't, you know, I had plenty of time as an exec. I hope none of my former staff is listening to this. Just kidding. But I had plenty of time to read over all 290 some pages, the AFI 362406. Like, okay, I want to know as an exec, where are those really strange rules at, so we don't get tripped up anymore. And here's some great examples that we should all be aware of. Oh, my complete list, by the way, I'm not going to show all of it. Look at the AFI. Or, by the way, someone on an iPhone. I just muted. Oh, and there's a little pie chart showing the distribution of pages throughout all chapters. So if you notice, chapter 4 down here, the first red bubble, makes up 19% of the AFI. There are 10 chapters in the intro. 1 out of 10 makes up 20%. What it should make up, if everything was on average, 10%. And it doesn't. So it makes up double what it should. Then we got PRFs. They make up 17%. Why? Well, we want to make sure that we are choosing the best officers to lead our Air Force, 05 and above. So there are lots of details to go into that endeavor. So, examples of trapdoors. Did you know bullets can be up to 2 lines? It's ill-advised, but they can be up to 2 lines. I'm just going to go ahead and fill my slide here. Everybody's favorite when I present this is in red. Did you know that for evals, the rating will not be directed to write or draft any portion of his or her own performance report? Let's be real. I don't know how much this is actually followed in the Air Force. The very next sentence, it's either the very next or the one right before it says, we can provide input, but we are not supposed to be directed to write or draft any portion. I will say, if you want to make a good impression, a fairly decent litmus test of if you're ready to move on to the upper ranks, if you so aspire to do that, is showing your supervisor that you can write bullets. So there's that push and pull effect to kind of deal with. Some other trapdoors, I kind of highlighted them. You're not allowed to give a continuation sheet if you have too many abbreviations or acronyms. So on the back, when it's asking you to spell out all those acronyms, if you run over, too bad, you should probably consider spelling things out or finding new ways of saying those acronyms, or just recraft the bullet altogether. All right. By the way, it's now a commander discretion if you fail a PT test, if he's going to make it a referral. So that kind of focuses on the whole airman concept. That's pretty nice to know. Next one. I'm just going to go ahead and fill the slide again. We will go to, I got one more. All right. So if you're going to get a referral eval, you only have 3 business days to respond. did you know that if you're going to give someone a referral eval, you cannot show the comments to the next evaluator until that rating hasn't had a chance for a rebuttal. So if you're a technical sergeant and you're about to have a referral report on a senior airman, the next one in line is master or senior master sergeant, whatever it may be, they can't see any of those bullets. It's illegal to show them that until the rating gives their side of the story. Just like in the justice system, due process, we give everybody a fair chance. So go showing anybody else those bullets until the rating gets a chance. Also, midterm feedback is mandatory, always. It actually says NA is not an acceptable excuse for not giving midterm feedback. So it must happen. This one's not highlighted, but it's the one right under the first green bullet. A lot of times I've seen as an exec, people are getting pushed for AFIT or expeditionary warfare school, stuff like that. You can't do that. You can mention that if they're going to be assigned there as like permanent party to AFIT, but you can't say push for AFIT or push for an AFIT slot. That's 100% illegal. Also, if you are a DG but you didn't get a training report, or if it doesn't really mention it, the rater can mention it, and you can call that formal training unit or whatever it may be and give the criteria on the back. So you can still kind of mention your DG. And I believe this is my last trapdoor slide. Yep. So senior NCO, if you're going to get a strat, this is kind of a new one. You do need an associate's degree or more. And then it's mandatory. By the way, yeah, it's mandatory if the officer is formal training for just 10 days. So you captains or you soon to be captains, or if you haven't gone to SOS, there's a certain physical event you will do there. You know, I won't say what it is, but there's a physical event you will do there. It's fun. If you get hurt on the 10th day and get dismissed from SOS, they still need to give you a training report. It's crazy, I know. Even though SOS is supposed to be 6 weeks long, if we ever go back to in-person, thank you, COVID. But yeah, you get a training report for only being there 10 days out of the public max, 6 weeks, 42 days. It's crazy. So make sure you know that, because that does mean something. And then, so I always make little infographics in my bullet writing guide to kind of tell the story. This is my infographic for the general officer eval. So we're going to go over this real quick. No, I'm just kidding. We're not going to go over this. But my guide will kind of show you, you know, I have infographics on each chapter to kind of summarize what's going on. It's called my TAIL section, TAIL, stands for timelines, absolutes. So absolutes meaning the first, the last, the only, or never, or always. Insightful information, and then limits. So limits meaning this will happen by the 30th day, or you know, the MPS must file it by an OPR by 60 days after closeout, stuff like that. The general officer eval section is atrocious. It's got a lot of obscure rules, and I kind of captured it in what I call a cellular pathway chart. Any bio nerds out there? Haha, got it. But yeah, that's just an example of what I put in my guide. Last section is the possible future of OPRs. So if you are enlisted and you don't care about OPRs and you don't think you'll have any questions, this is it. This is the last one, so feel free to go. But for you officers, this is where I kind of talk about my LIME acronym in a little bit more in depth. That's why you see LIMEs in the background. The Air Force Doctrine Document 1-2, I know it says AFI, my apologies, it's actually AFTD 1-2, speaks about these. The order it gives is ELMI, execute the mission, leading people, manage resources, and improve the unit. I call it LIME because it's a lot easier to remember than ELMI. There's also MILE, but I believe, in my opinion, that as officers, the most important one on this list, and this is strictly opinion, is leading people. Because if you're not doing that, then none of the rest are probably going to be all that effective. If you can't lead, you won't be able to manage your resources well, because you got to lead that team to understand where all resources need to be allocated, whether it's money, facility, equipment, you name it. If you can't lead, you're probably definitely not going to improve the unit. I don't think I really need to talk about executing the mission. But then after that, M, I, and E, they kind of all, are in a three-way tie, at least in my opinion. If you can't manage resources, you're not going to be able to improve the unit. You can't execute the mission. But if you can't execute the mission, what are the metrics to show that you even improve the unit? And so there's a, way to interconnect them all. But what I'm trying to say here is that these are the major graded areas of an inspection, right? And so when you're formulating your bullets, it is kind of advised to focus on how are your bullets speaking to these four major graded areas? How are you leading people? How are you improving the unit? So that can speak, when you're leading people, readiness, training, stuff like that, development. My bullet writing guide at the very end has a whole section on squeezing the line into your bullets. So it goes in more depth on what are the metrics that can show it, what are the artifacts you can reference, and then the key words that are mentioned in that Air Force doctrine document. We are very, very proficient by now at writing bullets that say we have executed our mission. That's what we do all the time. But how many of us have really talked about maybe process improvement or, maybe even climate survey, stuff like that with our folks to show that we are improving, that we are leading them. Leading people is a very difficult thing to quantify. It's tough. From my Air Force ROTC experience, we quantify leadership on group leadership projects by having to see if a cadet was decisive, and how do you show that they're decisive on a scale of 0, 1 to 2, and their judgment, decision making, and their warrior ethos through the whole thing. The one thing that's very difficult in bullet writing, and I'll leave you all with this, is that we are trying to take, especially in evals, we're trying to take something that's very subjective, which is someone's performance. It is very subjective. We are trying to objectify it in a 1206, and then we are going to pass it on to people with subjective opinions on the matter and what they believe is important. When in doubt, officers revert back to this line concept, because that's where things are starting to head. So OPRs are kind of being revised now, and evaluations, and I'm not going to say too much because I promise not to, but I have been in talks with people that are, heavily invested in that endeavor. And this is going to be something that is going to be much more heavily focused on in the future. That much I can say. So consider that when you're putting these together. It's difficult to think of now, but once you go through the AFDD 1-2, it'll make sense. And conveniently, I believe that thing is only about 5 to 10 pages. So it is some light reading. All right. Last thing I'll leave you with, last slide at least. So as I said, I'm a Krav Maga instructor, black belt in it. So the big question is, how long does it take for the average person to earn it? It's a trick question. The average person does not earn a black belt. And that's something I'll kind of, reiterate or kind of use that metaphor for you all, is that you just don't become, you can't just stay as an average bullet writer, especially if you plan to go career. Bullet writing looks like it's around to stay for a while. And while there are different opinions and different styles and everything else that goes on to it, there are certain aspects that we have determined through the Air Force Doctrine document, through extensive research with 1,200 airmen across the Air Force, and through talks with people working on evaluation revisions that are set in stone, that are agreed upon, that at least 80, 75% of people can agree what is too much fluff in a bullet, what is just wasting space with level 1 data, throwing data out there just for the sake of it. So try to keep these concepts in mind when you are formulating your bullets. Think of your strong language, presenting data at higher levels, giving it context instead of just slapping data out there. As I showed you, comparative and level 3, level 4 data mean a lot more, can sometimes mean more than impact. How can you combine your data and impact to kind of get a general rough ballpark impressive that what's going to be when it gets passed up, stuff like that? And how can you avoid common pitfalls pitfalls such as overinflating or deflating your bullet when you're finally crafting that. So with that, I'm going to open it up for questions. Before I do, like I said, I'm not an expert in, I don't consider myself an expert in it. I consider myself well-researched, and I've done my time. This has been 10 months in the making, and there's no certification on bullet writing, right? There's no degree in it, no masters. We get it taught, you know, maybe for a couple hours in ROTC, maybe for a day or two at the academy, and ALS, I don't know how much time you get, but it's not something that's, you know, very heavily educated in our PMA. So that's my disclaimer. I am not the end all be all expert, but any questions you have, I'll give you my answer based on research and data that I've done. Really, you know, it's been going on since October, but I could probably make a case. I've been working on this since my assignment at Edwards. So with that, thanks for your time, everybody, and I am ready for any questions you have. None at all. Are there any, did I get on any Atlanta Falcons or Patriots fans' nerves out there? Are y'all Patriots and Falcons fans?
I have a question. It's on glass. How are you?
Good. How are you doing? Great to hear from you.
Good. Good. I know you were saying that you can't put for an impact you got coined, or, you know, maybe, you know, you want to see with a quarter or something, but I see it all the time on the very last bullet, and I see that it always sets you apart from the other NCOs. Like, she won the you know, for the quarter, but he won for the year, so we're picking this package over this one. So what are your thoughts on that?
So for coined and awards package, that's a great question. So maybe I should rephrase that. I advise against putting anything on there that involves coining, and I'm not the only one. And if you're a senior airman and you have a bullet on there that says you got coined by the Vice Chief of Staff of the Air Force, which I've seen before, okay, that's pretty impressive. But before you slap that on there, think about what are the other impacts that this action and result has led to. Because if you got coined by someone way high up there that recognized your performance, that should be I shouldn't say a red flag, that's a negative connotation. That should be a green flag that there has got to be some kind of impact or legacy you left behind to get a colonel or above to coin you. So, like I said, I saw the senior airman who got the Vice Chief of Staff of the Air Force coining him. And it was, you know, without spilling any data I shouldn't spill, he worked ridiculously hard on something that had maybe other country implications. So, and I'll just leave it at that. But, you know, I know there's certain things certain higher classification levels you can't put on unclassified stuff. But, you know, and we always wrestle with that. But all that aside, you know, that's my advice. If you're going to get coined, there's got to be a reason why that happened. Look at the legacy. So for young airmen and, you know, maybe junior NCOs, that might mean something. You might be able to put that on there. But, you know, mid-level NCOs and above, yeah, I personally, I advise against it. And it's only because of the logic. If you got that high, there's got to be an impact which triggered it. You don't just get a coin from 06 or above for no reason. But when you're talking about of the quarter, of the year, so might be a tipping point, you know, when two awards packages are really close and one mentions a coin from a very high level and the rest are, you know, really neck and neck in bullets. It is a risk though, because you don't know what the other Airman of the Year candidates are putting for that sixth bullet where you are dead set on mentioning Vice Chief of Staff of the Air Force coining. Y'all might be neck and neck, and then you get down to this one. Someone got coined by the Vice Chief of Staff of the Air Force, the other kind of able to articulate something more impressive. Or you can even put in there, if you can maybe craft it, if you are very hell-bent on keeping that coining in there, maybe try to consolidate the action and result a little bit skinnier so you can put the impact as, coined by whoever, and then what the rest of the impact was. That way you got both in there, and that's, that maybe be a little bit of insurance when you get up higher levels of the award packages. If that answers your question.
It does. Thank you.
No problem. Anybody else out there? Everything else makes sense, I hope. Any questions? Anything not clear? Okay, well, I'll keep sticking around if there are. Oh, wait, let me check the chat. That's right. I didn't check the chat. Sometimes people check or type stuff up on chat. What is my take on double whammies? Impact. So Himanshu Chopra, if you're still on, can you kind of elaborate? Otherwise, I'm going to give my best guess on what you're getting at, or if someone can help me out.
Sure. I'll elaborate a little bit. First of all, thank you for this great presentation. It's really eye-opening and impressive. So thank you for all the hard work you put into it. In my new unit, I've noticed that a lot of these bullets are heavy hitting, but there's a double whammy impact. So there will be an impact saying they did something, they crushed a standard by so much percentage, and ... won something else. So there's a double impact behind it. It's still tied to the same bullet, but it's a double dash ... another impact.
Oh, I see what you mean. Oh, you're talking about the ellipsis, the triple dots.
Correct.
And then they're both residing in the impact. So I hope Chief Hood is still on. He's probably got some good insight on that. He's very passionate on his take with impacts, so I'd love for him to chime in, but I'm going to give my initial whack at it. Double impacts, in my opinion, and from what I've seen, is kind of the ellipsis is kind of a trend that's hitting now. I have not seen too many ellipses prior to maybe 2017. So maybe others have, but it is, in my opinion, it's a style of bullet writing. It's not prohibited. It's not really encouraged either. It's a style. So that's my take on just ellipsis. Now, when you're talking about impact, ... impact, yeah, I think it's okay to kind of, have a double impact if you can squeeze it. If you're gonna put a double impact in a bullet, I would make sure that the rest of it is doesn't look like a Zorro's rival, If you shorten everything so much before that double impact, just to over glorify what happened at the end. One of the things you're going to experience if you try to hit a double impact is, and I maybe should have taught that here, is finding the link between the action result and the impacts. So a common error I've seen when I was looking over OPRs as an exec is that I would have a tough time understanding, how did you get from this to this? And if I can try to think of an example off the top of my head, it would be, like, let's say, I'll just go with what I'm used to, cyber. You fixed 3 servers and, repaired blah, blah, blah. And suddenly, your network is 100% secure. It's like, well, wait, how is fixing servers securing it? What did you do to the server that fixed it? Because if you're fixing something, that's usually making the data available, not securing it. So, okay, now if you write, patch these 5,000 vulnerabilities. So you see what I mean? So don't get too, I shouldn't say don't get too wrapped up around the impacts. That is important. But don't extend the impact to such a great length that when you look back at the action and result, it's so small and consolidated that the reader is having a hard time linking or translating your short action result to the massive impact, if that makes sense. So if you can swing it, if you can make it happen, congrats. But that is a tough craft to do because of the obvious linkage and avoiding too much consolidation in the first two parts of that bullet. So that's my opinion on it. Anybody else, you are more than welcome to chime in on that question. Because that's a new question. That's a good question, Mr. Chopra. Anybody? Okay.
I do appreciate your feedback. Thank you. That was good to hear. Thanks.
No problem. I got another question from Miss Annika Sikorda. I may have mentioned this, but where can you find the whirl? I may have forgotten to mention it. So I got a 60-page bullet writing guide that is on the Air Force Writing and Self-Improvement page. Or if you want to be on, or if you want it, you can email me. My email, I'm going to type it in chat first, and then I'll verbally say it just so I can get it on chat. So my email is mikevetri18@gmail.com. And if you want this guide, you are more than welcome to email me. I'm usually pretty responsive within a day or two. So, and I'll be more than happy to send it to you. And it's also on the, let me type it out, Air Force, whoops, whoa, I have a massive typo going on. Air Force Writing and Air Force Writing and Self-Improvement page. It's a Facebook page. So a shout out to that page if Sergeant Glass is still on. She has done hellacious efforts to grow that page. It started at 600 members in November, and we are now in August. So public math, that's 10 months later. So in 10 months, we have grown 9,000 members. And people are really great at responding to questions. There are people all the time that are saying, hey, I got a bullet question. Here's what I did. Here's my tentative bullets. Anybody have any input? And you'll see like 10, 20, 30 comments, depending on how many people can relate, that are saying, you should try this, try this, try this. It is a very fantastic and responsive page. There are a lot of great, helpful people on there that are just very passionate on helping out others get their bullets crafted well. And it's a vast variety of career fields that are, you know, asking, whether it's maintenance, cyber, I think EO's been in there. So we actually had a thread where it's like, you know, go ahead and type your AFSC, and if you're the same one, like it. And I believe every AFSC has been liked on there. So someone on there is probably your AFSC, 9,000 people. But yeah. So the larger, but to answer your question, Ms. Sikora, the longer version of the whirl is in that guide, along with everything else I mentioned in here. So any other questions? Still got plenty of time.
Hey, sir, I'm John Daniels. I'm a captain at a combat comm unit in at Fairchild, and I got a question for you
Sure.
about foundational writing. So I'm a leader of in a guard unit, and the bottom line is we just don't get the practice that you guys get with writing. Trying to improve that, trying to do stuff about it. My question to you, sir, is if I want to teach basics, just basics to my, especially my staffs and techs, but even my masters in some degree, what do you recommend for teaching basically foundational bullet writing in a way that, in a way like you described, but just taking it all the way back to the basics of what we should.
It's a very good question. That's a very good question. And if this is any encouragement, so the original intent of this entire thing when I started was to be black belt level, because you're going to find some kind of basic fundamental stuff if you YouTube it, if you go to our Facebook page, if you go to, I believe it's called like enlistedbulletwriting.com or something like that. There are so many sources out there on bullet writing, but at least the basics. What I'm going to do is, a lot of people have asked, and you're probably a couple dozenth one, is so what about maybe white belt level? And I was like, all right, you know, I got a lot of requests. Maybe I should start dividing this up. But to answer your question, there are a couple of things I would recommend. Obviously, the structure, action, result, impact, that's the basic. The purpose of bullet writing should be another. context of bullet writing. So at least if it's in the, not the 1206s, but evals, show them the basics of the AFI and things that they need to keep in mind. So not like the advanced trapdoor stuff, but the basic stuff. So you mentioned EPRs. So each section is meant to, you know, encompass of that EPR and who can get stratted, who can't, and you know the low level stuff, maybe some of the timeline stuff that I put in my guide that some people actually really aren't too familiar with, because a guard and reserve, you all have different timelines than us active duty do. But at least going back to the bullet writing, so action result impact, the governing regulations, so the eval, the tongue and quill. If you want to go with officers, Air Force Doctrine Document 1-2, so they know how to focus their bullets. And that's the basics. And then, you know, kind of common practices that we're all familiar with. So teach them about how numbers are important, and then, you know, maybe try to tell them, at least try to work them with level 2 data instead of just slapping a number on there, saying, okay, give them data some context, because that has statistically proven that will grab more attention than your basic level stuff. Inform them that, think of your second and third order effects of what you did. So, okay, you came up with a new curriculum as, you know, the NCOIC of training. What has that done? All right, well, people now know new knowledge, skills, and abilities. What has that done for the mission? Are there any high profile missions you've done or really cool things that without your training, they never would have been able to do? So you can stretch it just a little bit. So stuff like that. Tell them to avoid the fluff. You know, a little is okay, but I would advise, you know, no more than maybe 30% of your bullets shouldn't have too many descriptor phrases. The importance of push lines for at least your officers and your younger NCOs. So there should be a schooling push and a next job push, stuff like that. And then one more thing that I forgot to mention earlier in the presentation is going back to the descriptor phrase. So this, I haven't really made up my mind on, but for everybody else out there, with the descriptor phrases and the fluff, a great commander that I previously had said that everybody, once you get past captain, maybe even in major, everybody knows you've done great work. You know, it's like, okay, you did this, 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 this. What we're really looking for in our future commanders, so especially when you hit captain and major, is do you have certain character traits, or what does your senior rater say of you that shows that you are fit for command? So this is where you can afford to add a little more fluff, because now we're speaking less of the nitty-gritty stuff and more of how fit are you ready to be a commander. So words like visionary, elite strategic thinker, you do things with unrelenting resolve. You know, so not just saying stellar CGO. We're all stellar CGOs. We're in the Air Force, and you know we're off, like, you know. So those things that kind of speak to not only what you are, but something like kind of deeper about your character and work ethic. So that was a little bit, that last part was a little bit more than what you asked for, but what I said earlier, I would suggest those are the fundamentals. And then of course, like punctuation styles, you know, I would teach them about Zorro's rival, not going too consolidated, and kind of teaching them generally how much you should use of a lead-off phrase. You shouldn't be going way the heck over to the right, but your impact shouldn't start too far left, because then you have trouble linking stuff. So I would go with making sure that the first part can link with the end, the governing docs, the structure, the general structure, and how to improve data just a little bit. So that number is important, but then how can it be improved just a little? That would probably cover white belt stuff, and then after that you can work into yellow belt and orange, more advanced topics that I kind of discussed. Does that answer it?
It sure did. Thank you very much.
Sweet. Awesome. What else we got out there? Anybody going once? Going twice? Are y'all sure? Okay, well, if you're too shy on here, like I said, my email's in the chat. You're more than welcome to email me anytime. I'm also very active on the Facebook page as well, the self-improvement and writing page. So if there's no further questions, thank you for this opportunity to teach, and I'll be seeing you around. It's a small Air Force, and thanks for allowing me to give you what I've learned over the past technically several years. And I hope I hope you're able to take some of this and use it in your own bullet crafting, and hopefully some of these techniques gets you all some wins here and there in the awards category. So thanks again. It's my pleasure. It's my honor to help out my fellow brothers and sisters in blue. And have a good night. Have a good weekend. Thank you.
Good job.